I know factorizing is quite a tricky topic. And yeah, just as many examples as I can get through. So let's have a look at factorizing. If we are factorizing, usually they don't tell you how to factorize. So they won't usually say factorize this using dots or factorize using common factors. You need to know these rules and you need to be looking out for them. So what I say is every single time I see a factorizing question, I check for a few things. So do I have a common factor? Okay, so is there something I can take out of the brackets? So usually you would want it to be something like you take a common factor out and then you have brackets with everything else that's left. Okay, so that would be your leftovers. And the other thing I check for is, do I have dots? So the difference of two squares, that's what dots stands for. If you have the difference of two squares, you always are going to factorize it into two brackets. And you have a minus and a plus. And we'll talk through one of these in a sec. The other thing to look for is, can you do any grouping? So sometimes you can group things together and then take out common factor. And then we often have quadratics. Okay, so we know factorizing quadratics is a little bit different. So these are the things that we should be looking for when we're factorizing. There may be one or two other things I might add to this list as we go, but these are the big things we should be trying to look for every single time we see a factorizing question. So we're going to jump into a few and we're going to just try check every single time for these. So common factor, difference of two squares, grouping, or quadratics. Let's have a look. So first of all, factorize this one. Okay, so almost looks like a quadratic because we do have that square, but then we've got the cube that kind of throws it off. So we're just running through our list. So first of all, do we have any common factors? So this one, we actually do have quite a few common factors. So we can see every one of these numbers we can divide by 3. So we could say 3 is a common factor. And then every one of these we could divide by d. Okay, so d is also a common factor. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to take out that common factor. So remember, the format is always we take the common factor out, and then we put brackets, and everything that's left over is going to go in the brackets. So what you can imagine is we divided each of these terms by 3d, because that is what we did. Okay, so each of those got divided by 3d, and we need to see now what's left over. So let's go through and cross out. So in this first term, the 3's would have cancelled, and then we would have just been left with d2. In this term, 12 divided, okay, so let's just put that in there, so d2. This term, 12 divided by 3 is 4. And then in this d, so we would have just left with d1. Or just d, you don't have to write the 1. And then lastly, 15 divided by 3 is 5. And d divided by d is, they just cancel. Okay, so it's already looking, we're getting to a factorized point. Then we need to check, so do we have any groups? So we don't have any groups. Okay, so that's our second check. So we've done common factors. Groups, we don't have any. Next, do we have dots? So do we have the difference of two squares? We've only got one square number, so we do not. So the last thing we can check for is, do we have a quadratic? Which we actually do in this case. So we can see this is a quadratic in the bracket here. So the quadratic is always you have a square, then you have just the variable, and then you have just the number. Okay, let's quickly keep going with this. So then we're going to say, I have 3d, and now we are going to be factorizing this quadratic. So quadratic always factorizes into two brackets. So I'm just going to put my two brackets. Then the first term in both brackets is always the square root of this. So square root of d squared is just d. So that's usually going to be the case. It's just going to be x, or it's just going to be y, it's just going to be d. Then we have to check how we read this across. So we read quadratics backwards. So we say factors of 5 that have a difference of 4. Okay, so let's quickly write down our factors of 5. So the factors of 5 is just 1 and 5, which works out well because these ones, they have a difference of 4. So that just means there's 4 in between them. Okay, difference of 4. Or if you go backwards, it's minus 4. So those are our factors that we are looking for. So we want the factors of 5, so it's 1 and 5. So we are going to put them in here. It doesn't matter which order you put them in, so 1 and 5. The only thing then you've got to check is the signs. So if we have a negative sign here, it means that one of the signs is positive, one of them is negative. We just need to check which is which. So how I do it, I just plug it in randomly, and then I multiply these two brackets out to check if I get back to this quadratic that I had. Okay, so let's just multiply this out quick. So how we do that is, remember, we go d times d. So we're doing expanding now. We just do the opposite just to check our factorization. D times d is d squared. D times minus 5 is minus 5d. 1 times d is d, 1d. 1 times minus 5 is minus 5. Let's just check this works out. So d squared minus 5 plus 1 gives me minus 4d. And that just stays minus 5. So we can see this does give us the right quadratic. So it gives us this one up here that we wanted. If that's the case, it means the signs are in the right order. Okay, so then we have our final answer then actually. So we can then say our answer there is 3d, d plus 1, d minus 5. Okay, if we look at another one, factorize 8k squared minus 2. Okay, this one is a little bit more straightforward, I think, than the others. So first of all, we always check, do we have any common factors? So in this case, we do. We have a common factor. There's 2 in both terms, so our common factor is 2. So let's take that out first. So 2. Let's check what's left in the bracket. So this first one, 8k squared divided by 2. So 8 divided by 2 is 4, and we're left with that k squared. 2 divided by 2 is just 1. Okay, good. So the common factors are all done. Next up, we check, do we have any dots? So is there a difference of 2 squares? So all this means is, do I have 2 square numbers that I'm subtracting? In this case, I actually do. So we can see 4k squared, that is a square number. 1 is a square number, and I am subtracting them. So I do have the difference of 2 squares. So if I answer this then, when I have difference of 2 squares, I always have 2 brackets. You just put a plus in one and a minus in the other, always. And then what you do is you say the square root of this first number. So the square root of 4 is 2. The square root of k squared is just k. And I put that in the front of both of the brackets. And then the square root of 1 is just 1. And there we go. We have actually factorized this one fully. So we used common factor and dots. We can't do anything else to these. So this is our final answer then. Okay, so this is the final answer. If we look at another one, so factorize x squared minus 7x plus 12. So run through your list if you don't recognize it immediately. So common factors, we don't have any common factors. We don't have any dots. We don't have any groups. So what we do have here is a quadratic. Okay, so it just helps to have this list in the back of your head so you can kind of have something that you're looking at, so you're not just staring at it. So with a quadratic, we said a quadratic is always going to be in this form. So it always has 2 brackets. We always take this first one, we just write it without the square, so x and x. Then what we have to do is we have to read this backwards. So factors of 12 that add up to, okay, so it always depends on the sign if it's adding or differ. So factors of 12 that add up to 7. So that's how we read it. So read it backwards. Factors of 12 that add up to 7. I'm actually going to write it down here if I can get my mouse. There we go. Okay, so let's just write it out just because it's a good thing to have in mind. So factors. Okay, so the factors of 12, let's just check these. We have 1 times 12, 2 times 6, 3 times 4. If we check these ones, 1 times 12, those, if we add those up, they add up to 13, so it can't be them. 2 times 6, 2 add 6 adds up to 8, can't be them. 3 and 4, they add up to 7, so those are our factors. So we can put those in. Again, it doesn't matter which order you put them in, 3 and 4. Then the only tricky part with the quadratic is you've got to figure out the signs. So if it is like this, what you actually have is a minus and a minus. Okay, how this makes sense, or why we have a minus and a minus, is because if you just look at this last term, we want positive 12. Okay, so if I go minus 3 times minus 4, that will give me that positive 12. So the signs are a little bit tricky. If you have to put any signs, just put random signs, multiply out and check it from there, how that works. Okay, but that is generally how we read it. You can start to remember the rules. So if you have it in this format with a minus and then a plus, you know both of the signs are going to be minus in your brackets. Let's have a look at another one then. So let's see, factorize this fraction. Okay, they make it seem scary because they've chucked in a fraction as well. What we're going to do, exactly what we would usually do, we are going to start by going through the list. So let's look. Do we have any common factors? We're going to do it separately. So we're going to look at the top separately and we're going to look at the bottom separately. So do we have any common factors? So just at the top, I can see actually I have x in both of these terms. So I can say we're going to take out x as a common factor at the top. So at the top, I'm taking out x as a common factor. Let's do our bracket with everything else left. So if I go x squared divided by x, I'm just going to be left with x, okay, because that one cancels and that 2 cancels. 2x divided by x means those are going to cancel. All I'm left with is 2. So that's what I get at the top. At the bottom then, I don't have any common factors at the bottom, but I do have dots at the bottom. Okay, the difference of 2 squares, because x squared is a square number, 4 is a square number. Okay, so remember dots. Immediately, we put 2 brackets at the bottom. I put a plus in one and a minus in one. The square root of x squared is just x, so I put that at the front of both of them. The square root of 4 is 2, so I put that at the back of both of them. And then you can see, okay, do we have any common factors? We can't really do any more factorizing because it's all in brackets like this, but what we could do is we actually can do some cancelling. So at the top here, we have got x plus 2, and we could cancel that with this bottom x plus 2. And so our final answer is just going to be x over x minus 2. And that is as far as we can go in terms of factorizing. Okay, I think I've got a few more. Let's see. I think this might be... Okay, so 2 more. Let's have a look at this one. Factorize 3a squared b3 minus this. Okay, so same as always, we're going to start off, do we have any common factors? So both of these we could divide by 3. We can divide by a squared, and we can divide by b. So that is my common factor. So I take that outside, so 3a squared b. Let's see what we have left. So if I divide this one by 3a squared b, my 3's are going to cancel, the a's are going to cancel, and then the b's, I had 3 b's, now I'm just going to have 2 b's. So I'm left with b squared. The second term, again dividing by the common factor, 3a squared b. So 12 divided by 3 is 4. a4 divided by a squared, so we're going to be left with a2. and B will cancel. So just go to check dots. So difference of two squares. Here we actually do have, again, two square numbers. So they always look a little bit different, but your hint is always to look out for these exponents, the squares. And for 4s or for 25s, let's have a go then at these dots. So we've got 3a squared b, that stays the same in the front. Dots, always we have two brackets, a plus and a minus in one, doesn't matter which order. The square root of b squared is just b, so we put that at the front of both. Square root of 4 is 2. Square root of a squared is a. And that is then as far as we go. So that one is then fully factorized. So you can see quite often they expect us to use common factors and then to use dots. Common factors and then quadratics. So last one, factorize this one. Okay, when you get brackets like this, where they're very similar, so we can see 2x minus 3y, 3y minus 2x. If you get brackets like that that are really similar, that's a clue to just take a closer look at them. So they are really similar. It's just the order that's different. Okay, so in the first one, the 2x is first, and then it's just been swapped around in the second one. Okay, what we can do in a situation like this, with brackets like this, if they are basically the same, just the order switched around, it's quite a cool trick that we can do. So we'll keep the first bracket the same. And then what we can do for the second bracket is, if we want it to be the same as the first bracket, all we have to do is change the sign in the middle. Okay, so if you make that into a minus, you can rewrite that bracket as 2x minus 3y. Okay, so if you want to change the sign, or if you want to change the order, you just have to change the sign. Okay, so that's a trick they don't teach you very often, but you do use it quite a lot. Okay, so we are left with this. Now we actually do have a common factor. So if we run through our list, so common factor, we've got this whole bracket is a common factor. Okay, so we are going to take out that bracket as a common factor. So 2x minus 3y is our common factor. We've just got to check what's left. So in front of this term, there's nothing. So there's actually a 1, but we just don't write it. So we're going to say all that's left there is 1. And then in this term, if we divide by the bracket, so let's just show why we did that. So 2x minus 3y, I divided by the whole bracket. So that's why everything cancels. All I'm left with is 1. This one, I divide by the bracket. Everything cancels. All I'm left with is that x squared. Okay, and then hopefully you get an idea by now. So we can see the second bracket. We took out a common factor. So next of all, usually once you've done a common factor, there's usually dots or there's a quadratic. So in this case, again, we have dots because 1 is a square number and x squared is a square number. So we write it then 2x minus 3y, and then dots, we always have two brackets. And a plus and 1, a minus and 1. The square root of 1 is just 1. The square root of x squared is just x. And there is our fully factorized answer. Okay, I really hope that helped.